The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel had been designed, some 70 years ago, by an architect who believed in the moral authority of ceilings. They soared 40 feet above the floor, gilded and coffered and indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath them. Chandeliers the size of compact cars descended on brass chains, casting a warm amber light that cost someone, every winter, $40,000 to replace bulb by bulb. The carpets were the color of burgundy wine. The tablecloths were the color of fresh snow. It was the kind of room that told you, the moment you stepped inside it, exactly how much you were worth. Caroline Whitfield moved through it the way she moved through everything, with the precision of a woman who had mapped the coordinates of every room she would ever enter and memorized the exits before she sat down. She was 38 years old, the founder and CEO of Whitfield Strategic Partners, a private equity firm that had, over the past decade, swallowed 6 mid-sized technology companies and reorganized them into something leaner and considerably more profitable. Her dress was midnight blue, structured at the shoulders, falling straight to the floor. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back. Her jewelry was minimal. 1 ring, 1 bracelet, both platinum. She was, by any measure, the most powerful person in the room. She knew this. She had worked toward this. She had organized her life, her schedule, her wardrobe, her public face, her private habits around the maintenance of this fact. What she had not organized, because certain things resist the application of strategy, was the 7-year-old boy standing beside her, gripping the edge of her dress with both fists. His name was Oliver. He had her coloring the dark honey hair, the pale skin, but his eyes were lighter, almost gray, and they moved constantly, tracking every face in the room with an alertness that looked, to people who didn't know him, like ordinary childhood curiosity. It was not ordinary childhood curiosity. It was the hypervigilance of a child who had learned, very early, that the world communicated in ways he could not always access, and that attention was the best available substitute for understanding. Oliver had been profoundly deaf since birth. Caroline kept his hand in hers as they made their way across the room. The annual Whitmore Foundation Gala raised money for children's hospitals, and her presence here was strategic relationships maintained, networks reinforced, the ongoing performance of a particular version of herself that the city required of her. She had done this 12 times. She knew the choreography. What she had not done, in any of the previous 11 years, was bring Oliver. His usual arrangement, the quiet apartment on the Upper East Side, Mrs. Henderson, who knew some basic signs. The structured evening routine that kept him calm had collapsed this afternoon when Mrs. Henderson's daughter went into labor 6 weeks early. There had been no backup. Caroline had spent 45 minutes on her phone trying to solve the problem and had arrived at a solution she disliked. Oliver would come. He would sit beside her during the dinner portion. He would leave before the auction. It was a controlled exposure. She had calculated the risks and judged them acceptable. She had not calculated for the ice sculpture. It stood at the center of the room's eastern wall, a 7-foot rendering of the Whitmore Foundation's logo, 2 hands cupped upward, supporting something abstract carved from a single block of blue-white ice and lit from beneath by LEDs that shifted slowly through shades of blue and white. A work of considerable craftsmanship. Oliver had noticed it the moment they entered the room, and for the past 8 minutes, he had been pulling her, incrementally, toward it. She allowed it. The ice sculpture was safe. The ice sculpture was stationary and silent. She kept her hand over his and let him lead her, by fractions, eastward, while she maintained 3 simultaneous conversations with people who required her attention. Gordon Ashworth, 62, Infrastructure Fund. Yes, the Q4 numbers were promising. Denise Park, the foundation's executive director. Yes, she had reviewed the program and had a few thoughts about the keynote. Marcus Webb, whose firm had recently lost a significant deal to hers and who was therefore performing elaborate nonchalance. Yes, it had been a difficult year for everyone. Oliver stopped walking. Caroline felt it, the sudden anchor of his grip, the stillness that moved through him like a current finding ground. She glanced down. He was staring at a man on the other side of the ice sculpture. The man was carrying a tray of champagne glasses. He wore the standard hotel service uniform: black vest, white shirt, black trousers, and he was navigating the crowd with the particular careful efficiency of someone who had been on his feet for several hours and was managing the remaining distance through sheer practice. He was perhaps 40, with sandy hair going gray at the temples, and the slightly hollow look of someone who slept less than he needed to. What had caught Oliver's attention, Caroline couldn't immediately determine. The man hadn't done anything unusual. He was simply there, moving through the crowd, doing his job. She filed it away and returned to Marcus Webb. His name was Nathan Aldridge, and he had been at the Whitmore for 6 weeks. He was not, by training or disposition, a banquet server. He held a master's degree in education from Columbia. He had spent 11 years teaching at the Garrison School for the Deaf in Brooklyn. First as a classroom teacher, and then as director of the early childhood program. He had been, by every account that mattered, exceptional at it. He had left 14 months ago, following a sequence of events he didn't discuss, and the leaving had cost him more than his job. It had cost him the structure around which he had organized his understanding of himself. The 18 months since had been a process of managed diminishment, the apartment he could no longer afford replaced by a smaller one, the savings consumed by ordinary expenses, the gradual narrowing of what seemed possible. The hotel job paid $17 an hour plus tips. He was good at it. He moved quietly. He didn't spill things. He had learned, from years of working with children, how to read a room by watching the bodies in it rather than listening to the noise. This was why he noticed the boy. He had noticed him 20 minutes ago, when the woman in midnight blue first walked in. The boy's hand grip on her dress, the quality of his visual attention, the slight forward lean of his body. When unfamiliar sound moved through the space, Nathan had cataloged these things without meaning to, the way a carpenter's hand finds a planed surface and registers its texture without conscious instruction. Deaf, he thought, or close to it. Hearing loss, significant. He watched the boy track the room. He watched the boy pull his mother toward the ice sculpture. He watched the small adjustments the boy's body made to the crowd's movements. The brightness of the lights, the resonance of the bass note in the string quartet's current piece. The boy could feel the vibration through the floor, Nathan knew, and was orienting to it the way a hearing child might orient to a sound source. He moved on. His tray needed to be replenished. Table 7 needed clearing, but he kept the boy in his peripheral vision. The way you keep a weather front in your peripheral vision when you're far from shelter. The evening's program was scheduled to begin at 8:30. The string quartet would finish. A video would play. The Foundation's executive director would speak for 12 minutes. A guest speaker, a child who had benefited from the Foundation's cardiac surgery program, would speak for 5. Nathan had done enough events to know that the transition between the quartet and the video, the moment of audio shift, the change in volume and register was the moment the room's noise landscape changed most abruptly. He noted the time, 7:58. He repositioned himself on the room's eastern side, near the ice sculpture, where he had a clear sightline to the woman in midnight blue and her son. The trouble began not with the video but with the sound check that preceded it. At 8:19, a technician at the AV station on the room's far side sent a test tone through the speaker system, a standard procedure, typically brief, typically unremarkable. What was not standard was the gain setting, which someone had adjusted during the dinner service and which no one had yet corrected. The test tone came through the Whitmore's speaker array at approximately 94 decibels. For the hearing guests, it was startling. Several people flinched. Champagne glasses were clutched more tightly. A small ripple of irritated murmuring moved through the tables. For Oliver, it was something else entirely. It is a common misconception that deaf children cannot be disturbed by sound. Profound hearing loss rarely means the total absence of sound perception. It means a dramatically altered one. Many children with significant hearing loss experience sound as pressure, as sensation, as vibration that travels through bone and tissue rather than through the organized channel of a functioning cochlea. The sensation can be disorienting, even painful, in ways that are difficult to articulate because the vocabulary for it doesn't map onto ordinary hearing experience. Oliver was not prepared for 94 decibels. He had been, a moment earlier, standing beside his mother's chair during the pre-dinner mingling. Looking at the string quartet, with the focused attention he gave to things he found interesting. His mother had one hand loosely at his back. She was speaking to a woman in a red dress about something Oliver was not tracking. The tone hit. The change in him was not gradual. It was immediate. The way a power cut is immediate. The full presence of something replaced, in an instant, by its complete absence. His body went rigid. His hands came up to the sides of his head, pressing flat against his ears in a gesture that would not stop the sensation because it was not coming from his ears but from everywhere and from the floor under his feet and the walls beside him and the sternum in the center of his chest. Oliver, Caroline's hand was on his arm. Oliver, look at me. He couldn't look at her. His eyes had closed. The tone lasted 4 seconds. To Oliver, it lasted considerably longer. When it cut off, he opened his eyes. The room was the same room it had been 30 seconds ago. The chandeliers, the white tablecloths, the 200 people in formal attire, but it had reorganized itself in his nervous system into something different, something threatening, something that had just demonstrated its capacity to hurt him without warning. Hey. Caroline crouched slightly, trying to get into his sightline. Hey. It's okay. It's done. Oliver's hands were still pressed to his head. His breathing had changed. This was the moment, the 8 or 9 seconds after the tone stopped, when reorientation was still possible, when a known face and a known gesture might have been enough to begin the de-escalation. Caroline knew this. She had read the books. She had attended the sessions with his specialist. She knew what she was supposed to do. What she was supposed to do required sign language she did not know. She knew 3 signs. She had learned them 2 years ago and had not practiced them consistently enough to retain more than fragments. She knew the sign for more, which was not useful here. She knew the sign for eat, which was less useful. She knew, or believed she knew, a rough approximation of I love you, but her hands could not find it in the panic of the moment, and an approximation delivered badly was worse than nothing. She put her hands on his shoulders instead. He pulled back. Around them, people were beginning to notice. There are specific, identifiable stages to the experience of watching your child suffer a distress you cannot reach. The first stage is action. Caroline moved through it in approximately 45 seconds, cycling through every option available to her, crouching to his level, trying to take his hands, looking for his interpreter Maria, who was supposed to arrive by 7 and had texted at 6:58 to say she was running late from another engagement and would be there by 8:30 at the latest. 8:30 was 11 minutes away. 11 minutes was not available. She looked for Mrs. Henderson's backup, who didn't exist. She looked for her phone, which was in her clutch, which she opened and stared at for a full 4 seconds, without knowing who she was going to call. She looked at her son, who was now making a sound. It was not a cry, exactly. Oliver's vocalizations were particular to him, the sounds of someone who had never had the feedback mechanism of hearing his own voice, who had developed volume and tone without the calibration that hearing provides. The sound he was making was high and rhythmic and getting louder, and it was drawing attention in the way that any unusual sound in a formal setting draws attention, with the specific compound of discomfort and judgment that Caroline had spent the past 7 years working to avoid. She felt it, the looks, the slight repositioning of bodies. The couple at the nearest table who had stopped their conversation entirely and were now watching with expressions that were careful not to look unkind, but were also, unmistakably, waiting for her to manage the situation. The second stage is the recognition that action is insufficient. This recognition arrived in Caroline Whitfield at approximately 8:21 when Oliver's legs buckled and he sat down on the floor of the Whitmore Hotel Grand Ballroom, with his back against the base of the ice sculpture and his hands over his ears and his eyes shut, rocking slightly. The high rhythmic vocalization continuing. She sat beside him. On the floor, in her midnight blue dress, on the burgundy carpet of the Whitmore Hotel. She didn't think about it. There was no position from which to manage the situation anymore. There was only the fact of her son and the floor. She put her hand on his knee. He didn't pull away from this. He also didn't open his eyes. Oliver. She said his name knowing he couldn't hear it, knowing it was for herself more than for him. Oliver. I'm here. The string quartet had stopped playing. The third stage is grief. It moves through the chest, like a tide going out, not violent, but total, leaving behind a landscape you don't immediately recognize. Caroline Whitfield, who had spent 7 years maintaining the architecture of control, with the discipline of someone who understood that the alternative was chaos, felt it arrive and did not fight it. She was sitting on the floor of a room full of 200 people. She could not help her son. She did not know her son's language. This was the truth that the 94 decibel test tone had assembled from its component parts and laid before her. And it was not a truth she had been unaware of. She had known it abstractly, in the way you can know something abstractly and still not have experienced it. She had hired specialists and interpreters and therapists. She had attended the sessions and read the books and provided every material support the situation required. She had done everything except learn to speak to him. What the people watching could not see, from where they stood, was the expression on Caroline Whitfield's face in those seconds on the floor. They saw a woman in an expensive dress sitting on a carpet beside a distressed child. They saw a logistical problem. Some of them, the ones with children of their own, saw something that made them uncomfortable in the way that other people's pain is uncomfortable close enough to feel, far enough to not be yours. What they could not see was the specific quality of her stillness. She had, in her professional life, developed a very particular skill, the ability to hold the knowledge of a bad situation in suspension, to know the thing was bad, without yet experiencing the full weight of its badness, to triage and respond before the feeling arrived. It was the skill that had allowed her, in her 30s, to absorb market collapses and failed acquisitions and personnel disasters without visibly registering more than a slight tightening around the eyes. Her board members credited her with exceptional composure. The composure had been a technique. She understood that now. The technique was unavailable. She was sitting on the floor, and her son was suffering 3 feet away from her, and the distance between them was not 3 feet. The distance between them was 7 years of correct decisions made by the wrong criteria. 7 years of efficiency applied where presence was required. 7 years of solving the problem of her son by arranging for other people to understand him while she remained, carefully, at one remove. She had told herself it was practical. She had told herself it was the right division of labor. She provided the resources. The specialists provided the access. She had told herself many things that were architecturally sound and fundamentally wrong. Oliver's rocking had not stopped. The high rhythmic sound had. He had moved, somewhere in the past 30 seconds, from crisis to the particular stillness on the other side of crisis, the state of exhausted endurance, the quiet that is not peace but its fatigued approximation. His hands had dropped from his ears to his knees. His eyes were still closed. She kept her hand on his knee. She kept it very still. This was the only thing she could offer him that she knew for certain he could receive. Physical warmth. Physical presence. The pressure of a hand that was his mother's hand, and that he could feel through the cloth of his trousers, and that would not, whatever else was uncertain, disappear. It was not enough, but it was what she had. A shadow fell across them. Nathan had been moving before he made the conscious decision to move. This was not unusual for him. There was a category of situation he had encountered it hundreds of times in 11 years at Garrison, in which the body registers the need and begins the response before the reasoning mind catches up. The body had learned to trust itself in these situations. The reasoning mind had learned to stop arguing. He set his tray on the nearest surface, a serving table against the wall, behind a potted ficus, and crossed the room. He was intercepted, before he reached the ice sculpture, by one of the event's security staff, a broad-shouldered man named Gary, who had been watching the situation with the expression of someone responsible for preventing scenes. "Hey!" Gary put a hand on Nathan's arm. "Back off, buddy. This isn't your deal." "I know sign language," Nathan said. Gary looked at him. "ASL," Nathan said. "American Sign Language." "The kid is deaf. I can help." A pause. Gary was not a stupid man. He looked at the boy on the floor, at the woman beside him, at the small circle of uncertain onlookers. He was doing a rapid calculation that involved the concepts of liability, optics, and what the alternative is. He looked back at Nathan. "Don't make it worse," he said, and stepped aside. Nathan covered the last 12 feet to the ice sculpture. He crouched. Not all the way down, not yet. He crouched to about Oliver's eye level and waited, giving the boy time to register a new presence without having that presence imposed on him. This was something he had learned in the first year at Garrison. The approach matters as much as the arrival. A body that arrives without warning is a threat. A body that waits at the edge of the visual field is an invitation. Oliver's eyes opened. They were gray, and they were afraid, and they fixed on Nathan with the evaluating precision of a child who had learned that strangers were sometimes useful and sometimes not, and that the distinction mattered. Nathan held completely still. He let Oliver look at him. He kept his face neutral, not performing warmth, not performing authority. Simply available, readable, present. He kept his hands visible, resting loosely on his knees. Around them, the room had achieved a particular quality of silence. Not complete silence, there was still the ambient sound of 200 people in a large room. The distant clink of something. Someone coughing near the back. But the immediate area around the ice sculpture had gone quiet in the way that spaces sometimes go quiet when they are waiting for something to happen. Caroline Whitfield was looking at him. He didn't look back at her yet. Oliver was the only audience that mattered. Slowly, giving each component its own time, Nathan raised one hand. The sign for safe in American Sign Language is made like this. Both hands begin in fists, crossed at the wrists in front of the chest. Then they open the fists, releasing, the palms turning outward, the arms moving apart in a motion that suggests something being cleared away. Some danger being pushed back, some space being opened up. It is not a complicated sign. A child can learn it in minutes, but it carries, in its structure, a particular logic. The crossing and releasing, the movement from enclosed to open, enacts the very thing it names. It doesn't just say, safe. It demonstrates safety in the language of the body. Nathan made it slowly. He made it at about half the speed of ordinary signing, giving each stage of the motion its full space, making sure Oliver had time to track it. He held the final position, palms outward, arms wide for a breath longer than necessary. Oliver had been mid-vocalization when Nathan's hands began to move. The sound tapered. Didn't stop all at once, but tapered, the way sound tapers when attention shifts. Oliver's eyes went to Nathan's hands. They stayed there. Nathan held the position. He didn't move. He didn't rush to the next sign. He let safe exist in the space between them with the patience of someone who understood that a message sent is not the same as a message received, and that the distance between the two required time. Oliver's hands dropped from his ears. This was not a dramatic gesture. It was small, the hands falling from pressed against the ears to resting in the lap. A distance of perhaps 8 inches. But 8 inches, in that moment, was the distance between one state and another, between a nervous system in crisis and a nervous system beginning to consider that crisis might not be the only available option. Oliver looked at Nathan's face. Nathan met his eyes and held them. He was aware peripherally, as background information, of Caroline Whitfield beside him, of the room's attention, of Gary the security guard, 6 feet back, of the fact that 200 people in formal attire were watching a man in a waiter's uniform crouch beside a 7-year-old on a carpet. He registered all of this and set it aside with the ease of long practice. The only thing that was real was Oliver. He made the sign again. Safe. Slower this time. Even more deliberate. Breaking it into its components so Oliver could map the shape of it. Oliver watched. And then the moment that would, for everyone who witnessed it, divide the evening into a before and an after Oliver made the sign back. It was imperfect. His fists weren't quite right, and the release wasn't quite synchronized. But the intent was unmistakable. The pattern clear enough. He had received the message. He was returning it. Safe, his small hand said. Safe. What happened next lasted about 4 minutes and was largely invisible to everyone watching it. Nathan and Oliver talked. They talk the way people talk when they have the same language and are in no hurry, carefully, thoroughly, attending to each other. Nathan asked him questions with his hands. "What's your name? How old are you? Do you like ice?" He pointed at the sculpture above them and made an expression of exaggerated admiration. Oliver, whose nervous system had begun the slow process of finding its usual footing, looked up at the ice sculpture and made a sign that Nathan recognized. "Cold," Nathan laughed. It was a real laugh, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you decide to let it out. Oliver watched Nathan laugh and cautiously smiled. They talked about the ice. Nathan told Oliver in simplified signs, in the vocabulary appropriate for a 7-year-old, that the ice sculpture would melt by morning. Oliver signed. "Where does it go?" Nathan signed. "Water. It becomes water." Oliver considered this for a moment. He looked at the ice. He looked back at Nathan. He signed. "Sad." He said, "It's sad," Nathan said. Not to anyone in particular, just saying it because it was true, and because translation was a habit. Beside him, he felt Caroline Whitfield go very still. He had been aware of her throughout the tension in her body, the quality of her attention, the way she had not moved or spoken since he sat down. She was not trying to insert herself into the conversation. She was watching it with the concentration of someone watching something she couldn't quite believe was happening. "What else is he saying?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. Nathan translated as Oliver went. The boy asked about the people in the room. Why were they so dressed up? Nathan told him it was a party to raise money for sick children. Oliver signed something Nathan hadn't expected. "I was sick." He touched his chest. "Heart." Nathan looked at Caroline. "He says he was sick." "Heart?" She nodded once. "Surgery. When he was 18 months old." A pause. "He doesn't usually. He hasn't said that to anyone. He's telling me because he thinks I'll understand," Nathan said. "Kids sign things to signers they wouldn't say otherwise. It's the language. It feels safer." He had used the word without intending to use it, and he saw it register on her face. Safet. Oliver signed something directed at Nathan but pointed toward Caroline. Nathan translated. "He's asking if you know why he got sick." Caroline's breath caught. She looked at her son. "Tell him." She stopped. "How do I?" "I don't know how to. I'll teach you the sign," Nathan said. "It's okay. Just do what I do." He showed her the sign for "I don't know," a small, honest gesture. Palms up, a slight lift of the shoulders. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she made it. The sign was clumsy, but it was a sign. Oliver watched his mother's hands. He looked at them for a long time. Then he made a sign Nathan knew very well. Not because it was complicated, it was one of the first signs you learned, but because of what it meant, delivered in this direction, in this moment. "Mama." He had signed Mama with the flat of his hand against his cheek. The motion toward her. It was not, "I love you." It was something more specific and more provisional. It was simply, "You are my mother." A recognition. An acknowledgement. "I see you." Caroline Whitfield made a sound. It was not a sob. It was something smaller than a sob, and larger than a breath. A sound that had no ordinary name, because ordinary experience doesn't often call for it. They moved, eventually, out of the ballroom. Gary found them a small meeting room off the main corridor, neutral territory. Quieter, a table and some chairs, and a window that looked out over the city's nighttime geometry. Oliver sat at the table and was given a glass of water and a bread roll from the serving station, and he ate with the focused practicality of a child who has processed a difficult emotion and arrived at the conclusion that food is available and should be utilized. Caroline sat across from her son and watched him eat. Nathan stood near the window, giving them space, but she turned to him after a moment. "What's your name?" "Nathan Aldridge." "How long have you been working here?" "About 6 weeks." She was quiet for a moment. Before that, he had been asked this question, in various forms, many times in the past 14 months. He had developed several versions of the answer. Most of them were technically true and emotionally evasive. He looked at Oliver. who was examining a piece of bread with the same focused interest he'd directed at the ice sculpture. "I ran an early childhood program at a school for the deaf in Brooklyn for 11 years, he said. "I left last year." "Why?" The direct question. He appreciated it. It was the version he actually had to answer. He had, before Ellie died, thought of himself as someone who understood grief in the professional sense, someone who had sat with many families in the early days of diagnosis, in the rooms where you learned what your child's life would and would not contain, and had offered the steady, informed presence that those rooms required. He had been good at it. He had known what to say and what not to say. He had understood. With the theoretical understanding that experience gives and tragedy revises, that parents needed two things in equal measure: accurate information and the permission to feel what they felt. He had not understood, until it was his turn, that theoretical understanding of grief is to actual grief roughly what a map is to the territory. Accurate in its outlines. Entirely unprepared for the weather. Ellie had been 9 years and 4 months old. She had been deaf since birth, like Oliver. And she had attended Garrison since she was 3. First as a student, and then, in the way of children whose parents work somewhere, as a kind of auxiliary member of the community, present on weekends when he went in to prepare for the week. Present on the occasional evening event. Known to every teacher and aide and administrator in the building. She had been funny. This was the thing Nathan found himself returning to most often. In the months after, not her beauty or her sweetness, or any of the qualities you were supposed to eulogize, but her particular brand of humor, which was dry and timing-dependent, and delivered with impeccable deadpan in a language that did not have the same relationship to pacing that spoken language did, and which was therefore funnier than it should have been because the timing was always slightly unexpected. She had signed a joke about penguins. The night before her temperature spiked, he had been cooking dinner. She had been sitting at the kitchen counter doing homework she was not supposed to be doing at the kitchen counter, and she had interrupted him to sign the joke about penguins, which she had heard from a classmate and which was not, objectively, a very good joke, but which she delivered with such complete commitment to the bit that he had laughed so hard he'd had to put down the spatula. He thought about that every day. The spatula. The joke that wasn't very good. The laugh that was. The next morning she couldn't stand up. Bacterial meningitis, the emergency physician had said, had a progression that was sometimes very fast. This was not a comfort. It was information delivered in the tone of information that could not be softened without being dishonest, and Nathan, even in the receiving of it, had recognized this and had been grateful for the honesty while being destroyed by the thing the honesty described. She died on a Thursday, in the afternoon, with Nathan holding her left hand and a nurse holding her right. He had gone back to the school the following Monday because he didn't know what else to do. He had walked through the building and stood in the doorway of his classroom and looked at the small chairs arranged around the small tables, and the ASL alphabet poster on the wall, and the model of a human ear on the shelf that he used to explain to new students why hearing worked for some people and not for others. He had stood there for several minutes. Then he had closed the door and walked out of the building and not gone back. He had not, until tonight, described any of this to anyone who hadn't already known it. "My daughter was a student there," he said. "She died 14 months ago. Meningitis. She was 9. He said it the way you say things you've said many times, not without pain, but with the particular flatness of language that has been used so much, it has worn itself smooth. After that, I couldn't. The school was the right place for other people's children. I couldn't be there anymore." Caroline looked at him for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said. These words, Nathan had found, were usually where conversations about Eleanor ended. People said them, and the conversation pivoted, with some relief, toward other ground. It was not unkindness. It was the ordinary discomfort of having arrived at a depth most exchanges aren't built to handle. Caroline didn't pivot. "Her name?" she asked. "Eleanor," he said. "Ellie." Oliver had finished the bread and was looking at Nathan. He signed something. Nathan smiled. "He wants to know if I have a dog." "Do you?" "No." He signed no dog to Oliver. who made an expression of resigned disappointment that was so precisely childlike that Nathan had to look away for a moment. "I've thought about getting one," he said, to the air. "I should have learned," Caroline said. Nathan waited. "ASL. I should have learned it properly, years ago. I hired people to do it. It seemed like the efficient solution." She had her hands in her lap, looking at them. "I kept thinking I'd get better at it. When things slowed down, there was always going to be a better time." "There usually is," Nathan said. "The better time is usually now, though." "A silence. Would you teach me?" she asked. He looked at her. He had not expected the question in this form, this quickly. He had expected something else, a card, perhaps, a reference to her assistant, a mention of a program she would look into. He had not expected the direct question, in a small room, at 8:40 in the evening, with the sounds of an ongoing gala filtering under the door. "Yes," he said. The teaching began 3 days later in the living room of Caroline's apartment on the Upper East Side, and it was harder than she had anticipated, not because the signs themselves were difficult, though some were. And her hands moved with the wooden uncertainty of a person operating outside her practiced competencies, which was not a state she inhabited often. It was harder because of what the learning required. It required her to be wrong, repeatedly, in front of Oliver, who watched her attempts with an expression that had no diplomatic softening, who signed not right when it wasn't right, who signed again when she needed to try again, who was conducting, with the frank authority of a 7-year-old, the first sustained conversation of their relationship in which he was the expert. She had not anticipated what it would feel like to be the one who didn't know. She had not anticipated what it would feel like to have her son correct her, gently, patiently, with the careful attention of a child who has spent his whole life figuring out how to be understood. Nathan came twice a week. He sat at the corner of the living room, a witness, a resource, a reference, and translated when the gap was too wide, and stepped back when it wasn't, and gave them the space to stumble toward each other in the language that Oliver had always lived in, and that Caroline was, finally, learning. In the 4th session, she learned the sign for sorry. It is made by closing the right hand into a fist and moving it in a circle over the heart. A rotation, a returning, something going around and coming back. She made it to Oliver across the coffee table. He watched her hands. He made a sign she didn't know yet. She looked at Nathan. "It's okay," Nathan said. He said, "It's okay." Caroline looked at her son. Oliver made the sign again, more deliberately, and then pointed at her and made it once more. "He's telling you it's okay, and he wants you to know that it's okay," Nathan said quietly. "Those are two different things. The first one is just reassurance. The second one is forgiveness. He's distinguishing between them." She hadn't known he could make that distinction. She hadn't known, until this moment, the precision of the language her son was living, in the way it mapped nuance in gesture and expression, the way it said things that words, sometimes, walked around. She had thought of sign language, in the years she'd hired people to use it on her behalf, as a workaround, a substitute for the real language that Oliver, regrettably, couldn't access. She had not understood that for Oliver it was not a substitute. It was the real language. It was the language in which he dreamed, and thought, and felt, and processed the world. She had been, she understood now, on the wrong side of a translation for 7 years. And the translation had been done by other people. And she had called this sufficient. "What's the sign for thank you?" she asked Nathan. He showed her. She turned to Oliver and made it. Oliver made your welcome a sign that looked a little like the beginning of a bow. Nathan went back to the hotel for another 3 weeks. He did not go back because he needed the money, exactly, though the money was not irrelevant. He went back because the arrangement gave him a structure for the days that wasn't the apartment and wasn't the particular grief of having too much unscheduled time. Caroline offered him a position at the end of the 2nd teaching session. He had thanked her and said he'd think about it. She had, to her credit, not pushed. She had returned to her flashcards with the focused application she brought to everything, and she had practiced, and she had not mentioned it again for 2 weeks. He went back to the hotel for 3 more weeks. He thought about Ellie every day. He thought about the last morning, the temperature she'd run through the night, the drive to the emergency room that he had somehow believed, the whole time, would resolve into something manageable. It had not resolved into something manageable. He thought about the school, and about his classroom, and about the 43 children he had taught over 11 years, who were now scattered through the world, learning things and forgetting things, and having experiences he would never hear about. He thought about the parents who had sat across from him at intake meetings, terrified and hopeful and uncertain, and about the particular care he had learned to have for that combination. He thought about Oliver's hands making the sign for safe and coming out slightly wrong and completely right. He called Caroline on a Tuesday and said yes. The arrangement was not a formal position. It was something more flexible, part teacher, part interpreter, part the person who understood what Oliver needed in spaces where Oliver's needs were not legible to the people responsible for him. Caroline's assistant drew up a contract and Nathan read it and asked to change one clause, and the clause was changed and they signed. The day he left the hotel, the shift supervisor, a Peruvian woman named Rosa, who had worked there for 21 years and who had, over 6 weeks, come to treat him with the calm regard of someone who has seen enough of the world to know the worth of a person who doesn't make a fuss, gave him a handshake that lasted a moment longer than handshakes usually do. "Good luck," she said. "Thank you," he said. He meant it. The Whitmore Foundation held its summer benefit at the end of June, in the hotel's garden terrace, a different space from the winter ballroom, open to the sky, strung with market lights, the kind of event that suggests by its architecture that the people attending it are capable of ease as well as power. Oliver was there. He was there not because the arrangement had broken down and there was no alternative, but because Caroline had decided, with the deliberateness she applied to decisions that mattered, that she would stop treating his presence in her professional world as a problem to be managed. He was her son. Her professional world would accommodate him or it would not, and if it would not, then her professional world required revision. He wore a white linen shirt and dark trousers, and he moved through the garden with the confidence of a child who had, in the past 7 months, learned something new about his own legibility, who had discovered that there were more people in the world than he had known who could meet him where he was. Nathan was there, technically as Oliver's interpreter for the evening, practically as something that had not yet been assigned a name. Caroline had introduced him, at 2 previous events, as Oliver's language specialist, which was accurate and felt, to both of them, like describing a river as moving water. True, but beside the point. At 8:45, Oliver appeared at Caroline's elbow. She was in the middle of a conversation with the Foundation's new board chair, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had the focused energy of someone who had recently retired from a demanding career and was applying that same focus to philanthropy. Caroline felt Oliver's hand touch her arm, 2 taps, his signal, their code, the gesture he used when he needed her, that they had worked out together, over the winter, in the living room with flashcards, and Nathan's patient instruction. She excused herself. She crouched. Oliver signed to her, and she followed it. She caught about 70% of it, which was better than the month before, when she'd caught about 50, and much better than the winter gala, when she'd caught none at all. He was telling her there was a boy near the fountain, a hearing boy who had been watching Oliver sign to Nathan, and then had tried, carefully, to copy one of the signs. Oliver wanted to know if he should teach him. Caroline looked at her son. His face was very serious, in the way children are serious when they are asking a real question. She signed, "Yes, teach him." Oliver considered this. He signed back the phrase she had to think about for a moment before it resolved. "What do I teach first?" She knew the answer. It had been the first sign she'd learned, the sign she'd practiced until it was automatic. The sign that had lived in the room at the Whitmore Hotel last December and changed everything that came after it. She showed him, fists crossed at the wrists, then opening, palms turning outward, arms spreading. Safe. Oliver looked at her hands. He looked at her face. He signed it back perfectly. Then he turned and walked toward the fountain, toward the hearing boy who had been watching, and began to teach. There is a photograph taken at the Whitmore Foundation's winter benefit 18 months after the first gala. It lives on the Foundation's website, in the gallery section that documents its work. In the photograph, A woman in a dark dress and a boy in a white shirt are standing on a small stage. The woman is facing the audience. The boy is facing the woman. Their hands are raised between them. They are signing to each other. The audience, 200 people in formal attire. The same chandeliers, the same burgundy carpet, the same amber light is watching them. No one is performing ease. No one is performing power. The woman's face has the focused, slightly imperfect expression of someone doing something they learned late but practiced hard. And the boy's face has the patient, attentive expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for this particular conversation. Off to the side of the stage, at the edge of the frame, a man with sandy hair going gray at the temples is watching. He is not signing. He doesn't need to. They don't need him to. He has his arms crossed loosely, his weight on one foot. He is smiling. The caption on the foundation's website reads, Caroline Whitfield and her son Oliver address the annual winter benefit audience. The caption doesn't mention what they are saying, because the foundation's communications director decided, correctly, that the image said it sufficiently. But for those who know the language, the woman's hands are making one sign, again and again. The sign she learned first, and practiced most, and never got tired of making. Safe. And the boy's hands are making the sign she taught him by the fountain in June. The sign he has taught to 17 other children in the 18 months since. The sign that is the first thing he teaches every time, because he learned, from someone who learned it from years of loss and practice, that the architecture of understanding is built from the ground up, that the first floor is always the same. Safe, safe, safe. Some things require the right language before they can be said. Some distances cannot be crossed by money or efficiency or the careful arrangement of other people's expertise. They can only be crossed by learning the difficult, unglamorous, repetitive work of learning, the kind that requires you to be wrong in front of someone who loves you, which is the most vulnerable position available, and also, it turns out, the most useful one. Caroline Whitfield learned sign language in the living room of her apartment on the Upper East Side, on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, corrected by her 7-year-old son with the patient, serious authority of someone who has been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for exactly this. Nathan Aldridge learned, more slowly, that the school in Brooklyn had not been the only place where the work could happen. That the work, the real work, the work of meeting a person in their own language and bringing them into contact with the world, could happen anywhere there was someone who needed it. Ellie had taught him that. She had taught him most of the things that mattered. He kept the photograph of her, the one from the year she was 7, at the Garrison Spring recital, hands mid-sign, chin lifted, grinning at something off camera with the confidence of a child who knows she is understood, on the bookshelf in the apartment. He looked at it every day. Some days it was only painful. Other days it was painful. And also something else. Something that did not yet have a sign he knew. Though he suspected one existed, he was still learning.